folks, this is an interactive stream. So if you do have any questions, please let us know. And whether you're joining us from YouTube or LinkedIn, you could drop it in the chat on either platform. And I should see it pop up on my screen as well. So if you have questions, please let us know. I just want to mention that. All right. So back to today's episode. I'm on the East Coast. You're coming to us from the Pac Northwest. Is that correct?
Yes, Bellingham, Washington. So pretty close to Vancouver, Canada.
Yeah. We are real neighbors, in fact. So Bellingham, a friend of mine used to live there, so he used to tell me all about it. He lives in LA now. But anyways, that's completely separate. Marcy, I'm going to start the stream like I always do. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, where you work, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I am Marcy. I am a senior software engineer at Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit education technology company. May have heard of it, may have used it. I work on the front-end infrastructure team, primarily on our React design system and accessibility, automated test tooling, Storybook. So lots of tools to render user interfaces that people use to learn and teach. And it's awesome. I love it.
Amazing.
So that's what I do with my time primarily.
Awesome. And you've been there how long?
It's been a year and a couple of months. Okay. I have a blog post that I've been dragging my feet on, getting out the door. The time keeps passing. I really pour my energy into my work during the day, and some days I don't have much left in the tank, but it's in a good way, because I'm very mission aligned with what I'm working on, and it's a great group of people, so I really enjoy it.
And I will ask this one thing, and I'll tell you why in a hot minute. But so ultimately, you are working in the education space.
Yeah, helping people learn math and language. It's the site's localized in a bunch of different languages, including right to left languages. So in addition to accessibility, we're always thinking about how this content will be translated, how to make it flip directions, how to zoom in and out. So lots of really interesting UI things that we need to consider and really try to make our components robust. So they perform well in all of these different contexts. So there's a lot of moving parts that we have to think about, and it can be a lot sometimes.
Yep. And I'm going to ask this one quickly. I feel it's going to potentially come back as a topic, but as someone who works in the education space, and even though this is a private org, is Khan Academy a private organization?
Yeah. Yep. Private nonprofit.
So does that mean that they fall under particular, how, say, like colleges, whatnot, they might have particular guidelines to follow, I'm imagining, just because they work, again, under the education space. But if it's a private org, is there this little kind of, dance of whether or not certain things have to be implemented because it might be, needed by law, but you're also private? Like, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think for our commitments, getting into school districts, there are definitely requirements for data privacy, accessibility, the actual learning standards that our content is trying to meet. There's things around testing students. And so we have some rigor that we have to consider in what we're putting in front of people. And that's one of the really cool things about Khan Academy is just the level of care about having good learning outcomes. So there are, people who have been professional educators are in the space, and I hear the word pedagogy a lot. And so for me, coming from a creative, accessibility side as an engineer, I've kind of upped my game a little bit to I get to go retake math courses, and I'm in in a space with really smart, caring people, and it's really a joy to get to contribute to something that meaningful.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really cool place. I enjoy it a lot.
It's awesome. I've always had respect for people who work in the education space. Obviously, educators for sure, but I do realize how kind of challenging it can be. My parents were retired teachers, so I feel like I saw this every day. But the second question I'm going to ask, and this is one that I ask every single guest that I have when they come on the Speedy Stream, which is, what is your first memory of sort of like paying attention to performance? It could have been, I don't know, like a blog post, could have been a presentation, it could have been an experience that you had. Do you remember what it was?
Oh, good question. I'm going to date myself. How long I've been a web developer. But I think the most impactful one that kind of weaves into my story is I worked on the X-Core accessibility testing ecosystem. You could say there's kind of a core JavaScript library that has all these rules and everything, and that got adopted into Lighthouse. And so getting to work on something that became the basis for other really reputable tools in the industry is cool. I'm excited that I got to live in that space for a while, even if ultimately I moved on to do things that were a better fit for me personally. But I think that's kind of like in my career history, getting to work on something that became a part of Lighthouse and part of Microsoft's Accessibility Insights tool. It's like kind of a little feather in my cap that I'm really proud of.
And so with that being said, was that your first exposure to a performance testing tool?
Yeah, I would say so. I'm trying to think back, further than that, like back to the days where we were using Grunt. Anybody remember Grunt? Everything was just kind of an add-on, and it was like this really complex system. Like at that stage, I don't think anyone was really thinking about performance, because we were just trying to make do with what was technically feasible on the web. Like the tooling and the browser APIs and everything have come so far since when I started as a web developer that web performance seems like it was kind of a nice to have that came later.
Yep.
But I think kind of living, working in the tooling space is when my awareness of it became, it was just so closely linked with what I was working on that you could sort of think of accessibility testing and performance testing as sort of partners, because you're running the same tool. It's, it's a checkbox to turn different tests on and off. And so in that way, I kind of got this mindset that this commitment to quality, that it really impacts users, which is sort of similar.
Yes.
So I come to it from sort of a tooling mindset.
Yep. No, I totally understand. And it's true because especially now that, the way Lighthouse emerged, and I've always said in the past, and whether it be on the stream or even in conversations, I've always felt that Lighthouse had this impact on conversations around performance without a doubt, and certainly accessibility, because like you said, it was like a check, and it's like, okay, let me check my accessibility in so many ways, and we could talk about Lighthouse and accessibility a little later. I will say this though, and I don't know if you remember this, but I don't know how it started, and this was several years ago again, but there was this email chain, and I think it started with myself. Oh my God, I'm looking at him.
Eric Bailey.
Not Eric Bailey. Maybe Eric Bailey was in it, but there was someone else in Toronto as well at the time, and who was also kind of like, straddling that performance and accessibility kind of, passion. And then I remember you got roped in. Then
I forgot about that.
Then Tim Cadlick got roped in, and I was like, oh my
Tim.
God. Yeah. It was
He's the homie.
Because I was trying to think as well, and I always remember this email chain because I think it started with, I feel bad. This gentleman and I were talking about it in a meetup, and then it spilled online, and then out of nowhere, this email chain started, and then I remember you being in there, and I remember Tim coming in there. Like Tim was like, "Hey, can someone wrote me in? This sounds interesting, and so I wasn't too sure if you remember that at all. I could probably find it too, to tell the truth.
I know. I think I could probably find it.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a
And
post on my website that I might actually have a screenshot from the email thread. My first
maybe.
accessibility and performance
Yes.
blog post, and I did a talk on it at some conferences. So, yeah.
And
There's
that's
just so much in my head that, if you don't think about it recently, it'll just get filed away somewhere. But thank you for reminding me.
Oh no, by all means. And I was thinking about it when I was kind of mentioning that we were going to bring this up. The last thing I wanted to bring up before we get into the meat of today's stream, but I always remember, in fact, this blog post of yours, or maybe it was the blog itself. Ali wins.
Yes. Yep.
And it was around the time where it was very fashionable to drag poor accessibility, and I was like, man, I think she's right, because we were going through the same on the performance side. It's like, let's drag people with bad performance, and I'll be the first one to say I kind of fell into that trap for like a week.
I did too. I did too.
And I remember your blog came up, you talked about it, they're like, hey, let's celebrate the wins, and I was like, she's absolutely correct, and I've never forgotten that, so that's why I'm always kind of like, hey, even the language, it's like, this is a little challenging, it's not bad, it's just a little challenging, let's talk about it, and so thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, and I guess just in case people want to go and find that, it was a Tumblr site, and A11Y wins, or the numeronym for accessibility, where you have 11 letters between the A and the Y. It was A11Y-wins.tumblr.com. It was hard to sustain. I sort of had a target on my back because people just are understandably looking for imperfections, because there's just so much wrong out there, that when I would hand out these like, congratulations, you're the newest winner of an accessibility win, if it wasn't perfect, I would hear about it. And I just got kind of tired of it. It's hard to sustain that like positivity and just constantly be looking over your shoulder being like, did I mess up? Did I miss something? So that's ultimately why I stopped doing it. But I have created a new version of that internally at Khan Academy, where we can celebrate things that are in progress. It's just a different environment than kind of the broader web ecosystem. And things that might not be launched to the public yet, we can share screenshots of internally. So different constraints. And so that's been fun to sort of get a reimagined version of that for my current workplace.
Awesome. Now, that was that was a very impactful Tumblr site, because, like I said, I definitely went through my little shift, and it was just, it just made no sense to just constantly like bang away at folks. So let's talk about this this topic of performance and, well, accessibility first, but performance and where they intersect, because you had mentioned you had given some talks about it in the past, but I reached out to you specifically because you were at Perf Now this year and in Amsterdam, and you were there talking about performance and accessibility, and where they intersect. Now, is this something that you'd been still kind of like working on? Is this something that you cover over at Khan Academy? Because again, we know you're a senior engineer with accessibility proficiency, but do you also maybe dabble into performance over at Khan Academy?
I'm in a position to do it. I will be honest, I haven't been spending as much effort on it, because right now we're trying to really like increase the quality level for accessibility on an old website. And we do have some newer parts of it, but there's just so much. I can only do so much. But the kind of overlaps of like the things I talked about in the talk, sometimes I take a UX like direction of user performance. Like how easy is it for a user to understand what steps they need to take, what buttons they need to click on? Can they tell that's a button, or are they sitting there for a second going, what do I click on? Like I was booking a ticket with Amtrak yesterday. Clicking around the screen, I thought the tickets weren't available, but it wasn't obvious what was interactive. And so that was a perfect example of this poor user experience performance. And in the talk, I brought up a talk from, I think from Carnegie Mellon. I have to go look at the slides. Maybe I could just pull those up in a minute. Yeah, we can
pull those up. Exactly. You know, and feel no obligations not to.
Yeah. So the idea of this paper, you know, from an academic sense, is that you can quantify the number of keystrokes it takes a user to complete a task. Like, there we go. There's something quantifiable about user experience. And I thought that was really interesting because often with accessibility, it's very squishy and very subjective. And we love to say the answer to accessibility so often is, it depends. Well, it's hard to get a 1 and 0 result from an automated test on something that it depends. So it's helpful to have some metrics that you can actually quantify and say it passed or it failed. And so I like that kind of alternative performance idea of measuring how long it takes somebody to do a task. And the talk at Perf Now, I just had this idea in my head of like ones and zeros. What within accessibility can you measure? And then you have this other bucket of things that depend and are subjective, and you have to kind of give an editorial view of this is accessible as good as we can make it. But then you get into the realm of user testing, and you can have one person say this works for me and another person say this doesn't work for me. So you have a conflict. But if you have too much of those subjective things, it just gets really hard to move forward. So it's nice to have a number of things that you could run Lighthouse on, or, the underlying Axe Core library, or whatever automated tool. It's nice to have a certain amount of issues that you can quantify and fix. Get that work, that easy win stuff out the door, to leave a little bit more bandwidth for these squishier, kind of hard to define user experience issues. But that was kind of the lens I brought to the talk, was borrowing metrics from performance of, hard numbers, and trying to get that to perform better on your site. If we could take an accessibility point of view for at least some of it, to kind of take a metric-driven approach, and then we can talk about the harder things to quantify that are more qualities. So that's sort of like in a nutshell, what the talk was about. And it was cool to get to bring this topic to Perf Now, because I had done talks on accessibility and performance 10 years ago, but I completely rewrote it, like brand new slide deck, blank page. I could borrow some ideas from what I'd talked about 10 years ago, but I reimagined it. And so it was like getting to take something that I've been thinking about for a decade, rework it, and then present it with a nice bow on top for an audience in Europe. And it was really fun to get to do that. Yeah. Kind of brought in this like rebellious, like get a fire lit under this audience for topics that could be pretty dry in an alternate world.
No, it can be. There's definitely, some storytelling element that needs to come in to sort of like give it a little bit of like, zest.
Motivation.
Absolutely. And luckily, being passionate about, the topic works, like yourself. And again, getting back to that sort of like original email chain, we're all here sort of like asking ourselves questions in this sort of thread, which is super interesting. Here's a quick question. You talked about, doing this, having this sort of like performance and accessibility conversation 10 years ago. Do you remember what you were talking about 10 years ago?
Yes, I was going to say, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, to tie to that email thread, like what we were talking about was where are the overlaps?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Gosh, what was in that email thread? I mean, a big part of it was how long does your site take to load and become fully interactive so that a
Mm-hmm.
screen reader isn't just experiencing a locked up page. And I kept that theme in the 2025 version of this talk, in that you might have a skeleton loader or something that has this perceived performance effect visually, but if you can't see the screen, is there any like indication of what's happening on the screen? So I think that was one of the topics that we had discussed in the email thread. I know Eric Bailey's accessibility and performance talks, he had a great point about the number of DOM nodes that you have on your page and the number
Mm-hmm.
of attributes you have in your page.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there just might be too much that a user is downloading. And so that costs money for users to download all of this heavy, heavy DOM. And some of that might be added to create totally custom components where if you just used a native radio input or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you literally are going to download less code as a user, from the markup to all of the custom scripting, all the styling, like that has a real cost. So if you do custom everything, it's going to cost users. It's also going to cost your organization because it takes you time to maintain, develop, and maintain that. And so I think that's some of the nut we were beginning to crack in that email thread. And it was a really cool experience to have smart minds come together and just sort of throw ideas out there of like, how does this accessibility and performance intersection manifest? Like what is kind of the common truth there?
You know, and the fact that you mentioned that this was 10 years ago, and again, I should have gone looking for that email, but I didn't. 10 years ago and today are completely different in the performance space, like just vastly different. And most importantly, the idea of Core Web Vitals being available. Because again, I've talked in the past about significant inflection points in performance, Lighthouse being one of them, Core Web Vitals being numero two. And in fact, I'd even say Lighthouse was A, Core Vitals was like A prime. They're almost kind of like tied. For the math inclined in there, and yourself now apparently, but
Yeah.
have you had people approach you or even sort of want to discuss, how potentially, and maybe not, but the idea of Core Web Vitals and their impact on accessibility? Because I was kind of chewing on it myself as well. And I was thinking to myself, okay, well, the LCP is kind of like a visual, metric. And CLS to an extent is also a bit of a visual metric, because we're talking about pushing, content up and down, left and right, whatever it might be, but just a bad visual experience ultimately. Two metrics that ultimately may not have significant impact for someone with accessibility needs. Now, am I just reading this wrong, or your thought on that idea?
Well, two things come to mind. One, there are plenty of users who can see the screen but use screen readers and assistive technologies. So some
Mm-hmm.
of those metrics will apply because people are having that visual experience as well as a screen reader running.
Mm-hmm.
But my second thought is it would be kind of interesting if there was a metric of accessibility tree ready or something. Like if there's something
Mm-hmm.
locking up the DOM or it's re-rendering a lot, and if you had some sort of metric to, I don't know, see how long it's taking for the accessibility tree to be ready, which to define that, the accessibility tree is a kind of parallel structure to the DOM or document object model, but it's only accessibility information. So what roles, states, and properties are present in the DOM. It strips out unnecessary things like scripts, stuff in the head. So it's a way for a screen reader to get just the relevant information on a page. but it's dynamic. It updates, just like the DOM does. So I think what we're really talking about is that initial page load. Like, is there something that's just locking up everything, that's taking forever? That would be nice to know. But maybe you can already detect that sort of experiential thing with, like, when the page becomes interactive. So far, it seemed like that kind of covers it, partly because of like how intertwined interactivity and screen readers are. Like, screen readers have their own ways of navigating pages, but a lot of the interactivity for things like buttons really does depend on that underlying DOM structure of buttons and links and inputs and all of that. So you have to kind of think about what the problem space is and what we would stand to gain from adding infrastructure like that. I don't know that the juice is worth the squeeze. Like, is it kind of a big enough problem that the mainstream would tackle it? I'm not really sure. It's just sort of interesting to think about and experience, like loading a page throttled or on a slow device and seeing what user impact does this have. And so we really want to look at user impacting problems like that and see, do we need anything at that point, or do our current metrics and Core Web Vitals, does that cover it? I think it might cover it, but I'm not sure.
Well, and that's it. So definitely one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, because the interactive part, fully understood. I watched a couple of the talks as well, but the idea that making sure that when things are ready, like the TTI, like when things are ready to go, often enough, that's when the screen reader will kind of like kick in. So, long or / slow TTIs may definitely have the impact. We talked about all the DOM nodes, and then that having to be ready, then the accessibility tree having to be ready. So that certainly, makes an absolutely clear connection. But, in my head, I was like, is that really it? Like, are these the main details that we should be looking after? Because another thing that kind of crossed my mind, and again, let me know what your experience is like here. I know that screen reader users are completely different than ordinary sort of like mobile users in general. And I say that simply because I've seen and heard screen reader users, and it's like it's like times 10 on the speed. Like, I don't know how they figure it out. I was like, how do you?
You really do get used to it. My speed is jacked up too. And then I hear slow speed. Right. I'm like, it happened to me too. Even though I'm not an expert by any means at using a screen reader, you do adapt to the speed for sure.
So how does that, as you sort of build out your experience, like, is this something that if you have a site that, well, then again, if you're building for accessibility needs first, like there are certain things I'm sure people look after, but does that, because we always talk about like this user experience, is it pleasurable, does it work? How do you deal with a user experience from a voiceover or user who has everything on times 10? Like, how do you build out for that?
Good question. Yes, sometimes you can keep things simple. I mean, the screen reading speed of what it's actually reading out aloud, I think, isn't as meaningful as how long it takes for it to start reading. Because that speed is so variable that we have to sort of like free ourselves from trying to be too precise when users can configure so many things on their system. And I think a bigger thing that impacts us is looking at which browsers are used the most in, a given website, which screen readers are known to be used with those browsers, which we can't test for privacy reasons. But there's things like the WebAIM screen reader survey, where people volunteer what platforms they're using on mobile and desktop. So we can kind of get a reasonable guess of if users are on a Mac, they're using Safari, they're using VoiceOver with that, and we need to test that combination. They're on Windows, they're using Chrome. We're going to test with NVDA, maybe a little bit of JAWS, and make sure that we're not missing anything major. The biggest challenge I've seen lately is that VoiceOver is tough. It doesn't really implement some standard patterns very well. And we run into situations where something works in VoiceOver with certain combinations and doesn't in NVDA on Windows. And then we fix it for NVDA because those people use it more. Guess what? It breaks in VoiceOver. So we're back to this like fragmented ecosystem where trying to fix it in one place breaks it in another. And it's madness. It takes me back to like browser sniffing, like, oh, maybe I'll add a set timeout for NVDA, but not for VoiceOver. Yeah, that's why I'm so tired at the end of the day.
That was literally my next question. Like, do we have situations where you have particular features not being implemented in particular screen readers that make that experience challenging for those users? But you're clearly saying that there is.
Yes. And NVDA, I have so much love for them. They have an open public issue tracker on GitHub. There's years of discussions of, why things work a certain way. I've learned details in their GitHub that have reframed my own understanding of how users navigate with screen readers. That may be things that I come to it as an engineer thinking, oh, this is buggy, there's something going on here. I go and read their issue tracker and learn that users don't navigate that way with a Windows screen reader. So it's information that we can use to make these trade-offs. There is a bug tracker for WebKit and Apple technologies. Unfortunately, it's kind of just a black box where you file a bug and then it sits there forever. And that's tough because we really want to see things evolve, but these are big companies with different priorities. In the case of custom components like combo boxes, which are extraordinarily buggy, we have to work around them in the short term to try and improve the experience for users, but our hands are tied sometimes. And I wonder if in the case of some of those custom components, which are in the ARIA specification, are supposed to be supported but aren't very well. I wonder if they're just sort of holding out for stylable selects and more like standard components. Like maybe they're just saying, we're not going to go fix all that stuff because we're just hoping that this standard component will solve it, even though it may not be the same purpose. But I've had that question of like, is this ever going to get fixed? It feels like it's not. And it might be because they're putting their eggs into some other basket. So I try to keep that in mind. Like, we have this custom component. We're saying use native defaults because it's less code to download. So like, I'm trying to get my mind around that space too. At the same time, I'm trying to, pass an accessibility audit and fix things. And it can be really challenging to make something work everywhere for everyone. There's some real hard edges. So yeah, that can be very tricky for various accessibility things where you fix it one place and it breaks somewhere else.
So, and you're getting back to the idea of, when you talked about how you sort of tackled this presentation this year over at Perf Now, which was very much like user experience related. And, the idea of having a browser, a
screen reader.
Screen reader, that's it. I use VoiceOver so much, I'm always like VO. So, so there is sort of like this lack of sort of like unison in the screen reader space, and this is apparently by your sort of expertise, this is also affecting the user experience of a screen reader user.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's tough to have to prioritize things like that. Like, we want it to work everywhere for everyone. Like, it just, sometimes they are at odds with each other and the way
Mhm.
these details work. And it's like real nuanced little details, like, does ARIA expanded announce when I open a custom dropdown? That exact experience differs depending on the qualities of how this thing works. If you're moving focus away from the opener or not, like it's very detailed and sometimes fuzzy, like changing from spec or something, but it's a pattern that's been in a website for 10 years or something. And so sometimes these are very widely used components that it's not a simple change to just like change it to try and fix it in voiceover, like,
Mhm.
and have it work in NVDA too. So like there's just a lot riding on these patterns, that now I just have so much empathy for teams that are trying to make changes, like for legislation in the EU, to try
Mhm.
and improve things quickly, because you might have a mountain of work to do and it's just physically impossible to get to it all. So
Mhm.
we try to
Mhm.
prioritize by user impact, how like core of a user flow it is. Is
Mhm.
this the path for them to complete a course or to buy something?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like there's different heuristics you can consider to prioritize things. And then you can look at browser metrics of like, is this our main, like a place where users are navigating our site? Is it on mobile that they use more? Like
Mhm.
we kind of have to juggle all of these priorities and fix the highest priority ones first. When we're adding
Absolutely.
severity to a ticket, it's like, is
Mhm.
it a P0? Is it a P1? Is it a P3? Probably won't
Yeah.
ever do those. But that's part of the calculus of this stuff, is like, how much is it impacting users? And then how does that map to like where it fits into the whole
Yeah.
system?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Um, I'm trying to remember. So far we've talked. And first of all, shout outs to Morgan. I see you in the chat. And yes, I was just gonna actually pop this one in as well. I do use voiceover a lot.
Yeah.
It brings me to a couple actually statements and something I'm sure you'll acknowledge. You know, I am. I don't have immediate accessibility needs, but I use voiceover every day. And that's just more like I just want to put my foot and my phone down and just listen to the article, listen to whatever it is, right? And I start to sort of like post about this because I would see these little challenging moments where it would be like dead air. I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And it's like I'm refreshing the page. I'm like, hey, what's and suddenly my user experience went from like, hey, everything's cool to just you know downhill. And so that's
Crashing.
why and I totally understood what was going on when you had mentioned that. And then it's a reminder for folks out there that there are more screen reader users than you realize because it has become a sort of experience of just kind of like, hey, I like this. I just want to put my device down or, have it run off my screen and listen to the article. And I know some data had been coming out about that. I think even, is it Netflix put out some information saying that people were watching films with captions a lot more than previous, and it's not like they didn't understand the language, it's more like they just like it like that, you know? So it
Yeah.
also made me think of that situation, where you may have more screen reader users than you realize. Um, I know during your talk at Perf Now, I think you went through like 3 or 4 points that you sort of like that summarized your talk. Do you remember what they were and just kind of sharing them quickly? There we go. We'll bring you to
Okay.
stage.
You see some
Bingo.
accessibility and performance
Mhm.
slides. All right. So these are my slides from Perf Now. Yeah, I sort of level set with what is accessibility in case people didn't know. I always like to kind of get on the same page and provide some definitions. I gave some real world performance examples of this intersection of performance and accessibility. And then getting to what I was mentioning earlier about what can you quantify? What are the things that are clear pass fail, things that if you're in an organization that just really responds to numbers like that, what can you bring to the table to try and have some actual metrics for it? And then my sort of fire lighting under people's seats to get them all pumped for this and motivate them to do it. I talked about why we should do it, including that it's the right thing to do. I talked about the legislation in the EU that's come online, and I got a really interesting question in the Q&A portion about accessibility overlays. It was a fair question, kind of going back to what I was saying about teams being under a lot of pressure to do a mountain of work quickly. There are these incentives and salespeople selling these tools for what are called overlays, which are supposed to be third-party scripts that magically fix accessibility on your site, except they don't. They often make the experience worse. They also make it so that teams don't really learn how to fix accessibility. And so my answer, might be spicy, but like, absolutely not. Don't do it. Don't be tempted for it. But if we go into, let's see, the actual intersections, I talked about how quickly a website loads when users can't see it, when it becomes interactive, and when it responds to user actions. And it's really encompassing the objective measurable accessibility and the user's subjective perception. And let's see, what else do we talk about? I really wanted to inspire people to do this work because a lot of times folks are in a position to do something about it, whether it's code review or engineering your own code or writing documentation or even just like being part of the conversation when user experience or user interface details are in front of you. You can say, hey, what about accessibility? Like, I tested this with my keyboard and I can't reach and operate all of the controls on the screen. Can you fix that now while the pull request is open? I talked about my origin story, which was working on the Target account.
Target, yes.
It was a fun time. I worked on the AXCore library. Now I'm working on Wonderblocks at Khan Academy. Here's what I was trying to remember. So the examples, kind of digging into the meat of what I brought to the table, included skeleton loaders, both whole page experiences and little individual widgets. And in my real work, I had one of these skeleton loaders, and our first attempt at it was to try and do a screen reader announcement using ARIA Live Regions to say loading table or whatever. But it happened so fast that sometimes the loader, like, it would resolve before the announcement would go out, especially when there were other page loading things happening, like the title, the structure of the page, like that, depending on the screen reader configuration on the user's end, there might be already things being spoken aloud by the screen reader that make it real busy. So if you try and politely add an announcement about a loading table, it might be too late. So we scrapped that idea and just put it on the table itself, like deeper in the DOM. If a user happened to navigate to it while the page was in a loading state, it would be marked with ARIA role description or, something programmatic to say this DOM node is not ready yet. And ARIA busy is tempting, but it doesn't really work very well. So we had to find things that actually had a user impact. And we know about the impact by testing them, by testing it with throttling, with a screen reader running. And so the skeleton loader one was an interesting kind of real world example. I also talked about device access for mobile because sometimes it's such an afterthought. And in some markets, that's how people are getting to your site. They might not have a big fancy laptop. They might be borrowing their parents' phone. So how can we make sure that things fit? How can we make sure they perform if they're zoomed in? It's like, what happens in those scenarios? Thought that was very important to mention. And then that keystroke level performance, kind of academic way of measuring user experience, that was kind of the third tier of what I brought as examples. Here's a skeleton loader from Facebook, which is since not what they do. Now they do a full page loader with like a logo in the middle. Here's one from Home Depot that has little, individual pieces of the DOM that pop in asynchronously. You can kind of see the little individual loaders.
Yeah.
And I went into the DOM and what that looks like and everything. So yeah, there's a lot here if you want to go through the slides.
Yeah, and again, we got
Yeah.
the sort of meat of it, and I just remembered you had sort of talked about, a few. What did I just see?
My cat decided to come and join us.
That's amazing. I was like, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" I was about to call 911. I was like, "I don't know.
Exactly.
She's in Bellingham, man. I don't know."
Oh
Oh,
my
that's so
gosh. Yeah,
funny.
we have wild mountain lions, didn't you know?
Oh, well, there you go. That was pretty
Oh
funny,
my
actually.
gosh. Sorry about that.
Um, so listen, first of all, thank you very much for your time. I do know that you're on the clock here, but I really wanted to have this conversation because I know your talk is not like readily public available yet. But I thought it was a great timing since it had just happened about a month, 2 months ago, 3 months, anyways, whenever Halloween was, 2 months ago. Uh, but it was an important conversation, and again, I don't think people realize that there are, details that obviously impact the ordinary everyday user when it comes to performance, but especially someone with accessibility needs, and having to use a screen reader, and that screen reader not popping up in time. It's kind of like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? Oh, okay, here we go. But like you said, DOM nodes, very important. Like you'd mentioned as well, we talked about, the interactivity of a page, also, very important there. But those 3 points you mentioned, from a device level to keystroke level, and obviously the uh, skeleton loading, which also has some impact, because getting back to what I said, you don't have to be, say, totally blind to be legally blind, first of all. And I remember finding that out, and I was like, kaboom.
Yeah.
And especially just generally, as you see people with like just varying levels of eyesight degradation, and you start to see their needs change completely, and how important that is. Um,
Yeah. There's a whole spectrum of user needs. So
yeah,
just have to like
yeah,
open our minds and talk to users,
yes,
do user performance testing, or
absolutely.
user testing and with performance, but like get outside opinions. We all have our own biases and things. So that's a very important thing to remember.
Absolutely. And I feel like we could probably even do like a part two to this another time, but we'll have to figure that out. Listen, I do know you have to run, so I want to thank you for your time. If people who have been watching this and are just absolutely enamored with this conversation and they want to follow up with you, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, find me on Blue Sky. I'm at marcysutton.com, I think, on there with their domain verification.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
can find me on GitHub, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, my website, marcysutton.com.
Hmm.
And yeah, let me know if you've
Awesome.
got questions. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And again, it could have been a lot longer, which, we could do like a part two another time. You know what we should do is, because I know the EU ruling was set last year. Is that not correct?
Yep.
We could sort of do like a 1 year retrospective, maybe,
Mm,
just to see how things have been going over there, and just have discussions around stuff
yeah, find
regarding
some
disability.
people in the EU to represent that
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, something like that. All right, I'm going to let you go, folks. I'm going to stay online because I do want to finish up with you guys. But Marcy, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. I love the background. I think you made my
No,
screen
thanks.
look so good. You know, I think I might just put this out, just mute. So you could just people could just see a gorgeous background. So I'll have to change
Oh,
mine.
thanks.
You're very
You have
welcome.
a good day.
Thank you very much. Likewise as well, and we'll stay in touch.